Dark Souls 2 is now on the PC, which makes for a happy marriage between the best platform and the best game we're likely to see this year. But just because you're the master race doesn't mean you'll master this one so easy. There's a ton of possible tips we could give you for this game, but in the interest of time, we're making this a combat guide. And instead of covering everything, we're going to try and get you thinking in the right way. This guide is aimed at those who already kind of know the basics, but we'll start with a couple simple ones that are too important to ignore. First up, hug and strafe. Many enemies have longer reach than it first appears, so instead of evading backwards, it's very effective to get right up in their grill and strafe left or right. Why is this so great? Think about your options. You can roll, that takes stamina. You can block, that takes stamina. But if you use light footwork to evade their attacks and end up behind them, you save the stamina for another hit. Now, in the case of boss fights, sometimes you two will circle yourselves to a nearby wall. This is when you back off, drag them back to the middle of the arena, and then resume the hug and strafe. Being against the wall is very bad for circling, as you'll get caught, and the deceptively wide swipes of certain enemies will find you. Secondly, it's better to take a reactive approach to combat. Until you know enemy attack patterns, wait till they attack you and let them wear themselves out against your shield before you retaliate. Enemies in Dark Souls 2 love their 3-hit combos, so after 3 strikes, that's your moment. Later on, when you know all the tricks they have up their sleeve, you can open up and be a lot more aggressive. When retreating from combat, you'll need to bait an attack to get a bit of room. Enemies will just follow you until they're in range, so give a little flick forward on the joystick to bait the attack, and then you'll get the breathing space for some S.T.A.L.K.E.R or a spell cast. With multiple enemies, you'll have to keep baiting until they give you a window of opportunity at the same time, and this requires patience. Attack telegraphing is a lot more obvious in Dark Souls 2. Instead of subtle changes to wind-ups, enemies will dramatically hold their weapons out to one side or directly upwards. Take this Turtle Knight for example. He doesn't have many attacks and his tells are obvious. When he holds his mace straight up, he does a ground pound which stuns us if we're anywhere near. Holding the mace to our right, he does one big sideways hit and he's vulnerable afterwards. When he holds his mace diagonally up, that's the 4-hit combo. So after just a bit of observation, we see that after the sideways attack is the best time for us to strike. Some bosses have tells that are just as obvious, but harder bosses will try and trick you with their tells. Take the Smelter Demon for instance. This guy very clearly telegraphs his attacks with slow wind-ups, yet somehow he manages to be one of the harder fights in the game. It's normal to get into a rhythm when fighting a boss and go on a sort of autopilot as you evade everything. The Smelter uses that against you. Part of getting into the rhythm is listening to the audio, and the Smelter will predictably lunge at the same point during every swing. This means you get in the habit of rolling at that exact moment during his demonic roar. Except when you see his overhead swing. This attack has a delayed strike, occurring after the roar, and is designed to throw your timing. New example. Another one of the hardest fights is the Lost Sinner. Her blade has a deceptively long reach, and she darts in and out of combat with great speed. But if you listen to the audio carefully, it becomes easier. Let's slow that down. That whoosh sound of the swing actually occurs separately to the swing itself. This is the case for most of her attacks, and you can use that sound as a marker for when you need to roll. Our last boss example is a simple one. When fighting the Old Iron King, he'll sometimes hammer his fist down. His right attack gravitates towards his right, and his left attack gravitates towards the left. This means his hammer attacks always tend towards the outside, which means if you always roll to the inside, you should be okay. Another important concept I want to show you is poise. Higher poise means you won't be interrupted during an action. Let's say we have 30 poise. Each hit we take has a certain amount of poise damage, which is separate from normal damage. If we keep taking hits, the poise damage stacks up until it reaches our 30, and that's called a poise break. But you don't really know the poise of your enemies. What you can do is count how many hits it takes to poise break them. Then you can use that info. For example, if an enemy is poise broken after 3 hits, you can get 2 hits in, ensuring your next will poise break them. Then hit with a 3-hit combo, and let your stamina regenerate, knowing your next hit will also poise break them. If they've only just barely recovered, you can repeat this process over and over and effectively stun lock them. It'll take more hits to stun lock bosses, but it's still handy to count your hits. If you know it takes 10 hits to poise break a boss, and you're 8 hits in, then you know you've got a window to heal coming up. Hammers, maces, and clubs do the best poise damage, and the stone ring from Things Betwixt also increases poise damage. With a bit of clever theory crafting, you can do great things with poise breaking, such as here, where we're effectively stun locking a tier 2 boss. When deciding which weapon to use, obviously first go with whatever you think looks cool and has a badass moveset. There's definitely room for that in Dark Souls 2. I often use the round shields just because I think they look cool. If you play well, it won't matter. But if you're having trouble, remember it's not all about the damage. If a boss gives you a large window of opportunity, instead of blowing your stamina on 1 or 2 big hammer hits, you might do more damage with 5 hits from a fast, low stamina sword. Or it might not be about the numbers at all. In this fight, it's wise to use any weapon with a left to right swing, as any right to left swing will be blocked by that massive shield. For smaller enemies, it's less about the damage and more about how many hits does it take to kill it. Does it take 2? How can I make that 1? What if I use a strong attack? What if I use a different weapon? If you attack them while they're swinging at you, that actually does a bit more damage as well. And if your attack kills them or poise breaks them, you avoid getting hit. A few final tips: don't ignore the adaptability stat. It's hard to get solid numbers on it due to the nature of it, but with high adaptability, you'll get away with rolls and other actions you never would have gotten away with before. And it's a lot easier to parry. If you're wondering whether a piece of gear is good and worth upgrading, very generally speaking, if you divide the physical damage by 10, then you're looking for a 1-to-1 ratio against weight. Anything above that is good, with the best items having about a 2-to-1 ratio. Of course, that's very general. Finally, there's a ring which, if worn, keeps your souls for you if you die, but the ring breaks. All I'll say about that is, it can be repaired. That's all for now. Dark Souls 2 is a huge game, but we tried to get through a lot in a short amount of time. I've been Junglist, and for more tips, keep it locked on Games on Net.